So let's just drop all that language because there's nothing true to that. And this is where myths have taken over. Instead of investigating and looking for the alternative process, when we hit a road in Western medicine, we tend to blame the person. And so you've got a problem here, you're just not responding to this medication, or people your age have this. To me, that doesn't really get us down the road.
Cue music. Places, everybody places. We're starting in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Autoimmune Hour, where we look at the rise of autoimmune disorders. I've brought together top experts that range from doctors, specialists, nutritionists, researchers, and even those recovering from autoimmune to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information about autoimmunity and how to live your life uninterrupted.
Thank you for joining us here on the Autoimmune Hour with Sharon Sayler. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio. Join the Autoimmune Hour's Courage Club. Sign up now at understandingautoimmune.com. Now, back to your host, Sharon Sayler.
Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com and, of course, UnderstandingAutoimmune.com. And I'm so excited that you're here, and it's so great to see you. I don't know what it's like where you're at. I've got the daffodils and everything are blooming already. I can't believe it. I don't know. Where's time going? And that's strange how it really goes into what we're going to talk about today. The fascinating thing I've been reading a lot lately is about ADHD. And they're finding all sorts of new research and fascinating things about ADHD. And I don't know if you follow social media at all, but sometimes I get into these algorithms, maybe. I'm not sure why, but I'm seeing more and more people saying as adults they're being diagnosed with ADHD. So I'm totally fascinated by all of the new things that they're finding out. And I have some dear friends that introduced me to tonight's guest. Her name is Dr. Connie McReynolds, and I'm going to read her bio because it's pretty amazing. I'm only going to read the first part, but it's an amazing bio. She's an accomplished professional in the field of rehabilitation counseling and psychology, and she has over 30 years of experience, and she holds licenses in psychologist, certified rehabilitation counselor, certified vocational evaluator, and her expertise is helping make a significant impact in the lives of individuals across all age groups. Plus, she is the author of the amazing new book. I'm going to read here also to get the title right. Solving the ADHD Riddle, the real cause and lasting solutions to your child's struggle to learn. Welcome, Connie. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. I look forward to our conversation.
Anyone who's followed the show for a while knows that one of the things that I learned early on, when I first started the show 10 years ago, I talked strictly to like the medical, all about strictly autoimmune. But the more I delved into it and my own healing process, I realized there's far much more to healing than just like putting a Band-Aid on it and getting it all better. And one of the things was how the impact of the brain. And please describe for us what ADHD is for you, because I think we have a variety of people saying they're ADHD or whatever, and maybe or maybe not.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's a very relevant topic, obviously, because I wrote a book about it. But the conversation starter here, which is defining this, is a really great place to begin, because ADHD, for those who maybe haven't heard what this is, it's hard to imagine, but maybe someone hasn't. It's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A term I'm not really fond of, I'll be honest. I've been a psychologist for 30 years and rehab counselor for 30 years. And to me, everyone has their own definition of what this thing is. And that's part of the challenge, is really defining what people have and then being able to figure a pathway out of it. And really, the concept is, sadly, that if you have this, you can't ever get past it. And I don't believe that. And my work over the last 15 years has really been about changing the narrative of that. Yes, people are inattentive. Some people have trouble remembering, and we'll get into some of this, what some of these behaviors look like. Because in my world, what I've discovered is that if we unravel the symptoms, which are the behaviors, and if we dig a little deeper than just the surface of the Band-Aid that gets placed upon some of these things in our world, We actually find out that for a lot of people, I would say 85 to 90% of the people who come to my clinics, at least, have something else going on that we can tackle. And when we tackle that, we actually get rid of those root causes for the symptoms and the behaviors that people are seeing, both in children and adults. And so the banter of the ADHD, I know when it first came out with the new DSM-5 about 10 years ago, there was a lot of uproar because a lot of people felt like almost anyone now could qualify for a diagnosis of ADHD. And does that really serve us? Does that really move us in a direction that helps people? In some cases, having a definition of what something is, yes, is very helpful. In other cases, it's stigmatizing. So I think we have to really check ourselves on, are we creating stigma? Are we creating a pathway forward? And that's really where I begin, is what can we do to move forward?
I love that. Moving forward, that's what we're all about. Just have the label, but move beyond that. You're not your
Mm,
labels.
exactly.
But speaking of labels, I'm just curious. So, is ADD and ADHD the same thing? I hear those two acronyms bantered about, and I'm very confused about the meanings of them.
Most people are. And I think it's because it is confusing. So ADD is attention deficit disorder. And as I said, ADHD has the hyperactivity piece in it. I'm not sure how helpful any of that is on the bottom line, but it may start a conversation. So if it starts a conversation and it moves someone forward in seeking assistance in helping themselves get better, then all good. If it becomes this thing, oh, I have ADHD, I can't do that, that's something else. And I really have to look at that with the person, the adult or the child. But really, the firm diagnosis in DSM-5 is now ADHD, but people still use ADD. And I think in part because there are significant differences for how this shows up in an individual's life. And what I learned early on is I can have 10 people walk into my clinics on a day, any day, and all 10 of them are going to look different. They're going to have a little bit different story. There's going to be a uniqueness to how they're living their life. And what I came to understand is that we can separate some of this out into what are auditory processing problems and what are visual processing problems. And when we get away from or dig deeper into what the behaviors are, what the challenges are in a person's life, we're going to have a better shot of understanding those behaviors instead of just saying, oh, this person is just willfully not doing something. And that's part of what I really focus on in the book is that people who have this are not willfully trying to cause other people trouble. They're not willfully not paying attention. If your brain cannot remember something, you can't remember. So it doesn't matter how many times a parent will tell a child or their spouse to do something. And if that person can't hang on to it, they can't hang on to it. It's not because they don't want to. And for particularly for children in the classroom or with parents, they don't want to be scolded all the time for not paying attention. That's the last thing they want to know. And so when we can unravel this, I use an assessment that gets at this in about 25 minutes. I go over it with the parents or the adult in my clinics or wherever the person is. And with that information, it's about a 15-page report. I can point out those areas of 37 areas. What's working? This is a strength. So when something lands here, it's in your wheelhouse. It's where things are working good for you. But right next door to it can be a hole, can be a place where your brain just isn't hanging on to this. And you're going to feel like some days you're losing your mind because it's like, why can I do this today? But yesterday I couldn't, vice versa. So it's really understanding what's happening. It's understanding those challenges that are facing that person in their life. And that's what we're all about. It's like identifying the strengths, but then finding those areas of weakness that are causing the person difficulty. And then here's something we can do about it.
Wow, that's amazing. One of the things, and I'm going a little tangential here, but in my recovery process that I found was when there were those moments where somebody could confirm my sanity. It was
Hmm.
like, yes, maybe this isn't on your chart of the common ways that people respond to this medication, yet,
Hmm.
what do you think? I'm making up this?
Right, right.
And so I think that's wonderful that you're finding ways to be able to find these missing little
Mhm.
parts and have workarounds because
Yeah.
For me, just when somebody confirmed my sanity, "Look, you're not doing this willfully. It's okay. You're not losing your hair willfully."
Exactly. It's a relief to people. And I know I had a gentleman come into my clinic several years ago. He was in his mid 50s. And how he found me, I still don't really know. I don't recall exactly how he found my clinic, but he showed up and we ran this assessment. Part of the interview process is I'm understanding what's working, but what areas are not working. And then we do the assessment in another room. So I'm not present for that assessment. I have a clinician or a technician run that computer based assessment. And then I review it and I come in and I go over that with the person. So there's no influence of me in the assessment process. It's just a clean, objective assessment. It's computer based. And when I started going over this, he had told me he was in jeopardy of losing yet another job, that his boss would tell him to do things and he just simply couldn't remember it. He thought he probably wasn't very smart. He used really inappropriate, self deprecating statements about himself. And he just felt worthless because he couldn't hold on to a job. And I ran these assessments and I started going over this with him. And it's like your auditory processing is really weak here. And so you're going to have trouble hanging on to what someone's saying to you because your brain has skips in it. It just skips. You have a skip here. Someone will be talking to you and then you'll miss a few words and then you'll realize you missed something. And then you're going to be thinking about what you just missed. And then you just missed the next thing that came along. And so now you don't know what's going on and you feel really frustrated and like you can't figure it all out. And bosses are going to get really frustrated because they're going to say, I just told you what to do. What's the matter with you? And that was what was happening. And so when we worked with him and strengthened that up, then he could remember what people were telling him to do. He could remember what his boss and supervisor were asking him to do. It's a game changer. All this time, he thought he wasn't very smart. It wasn't that at all. His intelligence had nothing to do with this at all. It had everything to do with the fact that his brain couldn't hang on to auditory material very well. He was much better with visual, but you can't tell your boss to write that down for you if you're in wait, can you write that down for me so I can catch this? Your boss isn't going to do that in a lot of cases unless you go to HR and request some reasonable accommodations at your job, which you can do once you know what this is. But in the meantime, most people don't know that they can do that, and they don't even know how to actually request support because they can't describe what isn't working. They don't have the language for it, and this gives them the language.
That's amazing because I can think that if I was in my 50s and I went feeling like what you described there were my brain wasn't quite keeping up, I would miss little parts in the short-term memory. I begin to think all sorts of awful things. Oh my gosh, is this early dementia? I can imagine that my autonomic nervous system would run away with me on
Mhm,
some sort of really terrifying train to find
mhm.
out that I'm thinking all sorts of catastrophic things. Oh my goodness, it's amazing that.
Yeah, and it isn't that at all. It isn't that at all in most cases. I do check memory, so I will say that we also assess people's memory conceptualization and sequencing just so that we have the whole picture, how all of this is fitting together. And auditory sequencing memory is a really big thing in school and in our lives. And if you don't have that skill set or ability in your brain, you're still going to miss other things. And so the beauty of all of this is we can train the brain to get stronger and all of that. And it's just repetition of doing it. It's a cheat code for life in some ways because we do a training plan for people and they just practice it like going to the gym. It's just their brain practicing this until it gets strong enough in those neuronal pathways to be able to hold that pattern now in their brain. And then their brain just naturally starts going that direction because that's the strength now in the brain. And so those patterns get stronger. And the more you use them, the stronger they get. I also joked with people, it's like that's why those bad habits are hard to break because they're hardwired in. You have to build a new pattern so that old habit that you don't want prunes itself away. And so you have to build something new in its place to get rid of that.
Now, this might be a bizarre question, but are you born with it or can you develop it from, I don't know, some sort of trauma or head injury or
The
same?
answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes. All of the above. So the multiple choice question answer there is all of the above.
I know that
Because
sounds strange because when I got COVID and I was going through the recovery process of long COVID, I was dyslexic for a while and I'm a
mhm,
writer. And that was so frustrating. I'd stop like, Why'd you do that? At least my brain was trained to know when it was misspelled because I used to be able to spell. They chalk that up to brain inflammation, but this is fascinating to me. So you could be fine one time, and then all of a sudden, for whatever, who knows, trauma,
Mhm.
injury, illness, something like that, you could find that your brain isn't processing the way it used to be.
Absolutely. We know that neurofeedback, and that's really kind of what we're dancing around here is the term EEG biofeedback and neurofeedback. There have been good studies about this for long term memory enhancement. We've been working with people with long COVID and adverse vaccine reactions that look pretty similar to one another with issues of brain fog and neurofeedback. So there have been good studies about this for long term memory enhancement. We've been working with people with long COVID and adverse vaccine reactions that look pretty similar to one another with issues of brain fog, and neurofeedback's been used to treat what they call chemo brain fog. And so people who've been through chemo sometimes have what they call brain fog. And research out that came out of the Cleveland Clinic years ago. I used to live in Ohio. So it came out of the Cleveland Clinic years ago, where one of the head nurses had run a pilot project with women who were recovering from breast cancer and had brain fog. And she had 20 some people in that project. And I think all but two of them using neurofeedback had been able to clear out some of the brain fog. So there's evidence out there. This is evidence based material that is happening out there that literally we're capitalizing on the strength of the brain, which we have. We have it from day one to day end. Whenever we leave the planet, our brain still has the capability of changing because it's changing constantly. And that's really based in the scientific discovery of neuroplasticity that happened, gosh, back in 1949 with Dr. Donald Hebe, who was a Canadian psychologist that kind of figured that out. So it's there. We can just capitalize on what our amazing brain is capable of doing. And by channeling it in typical manner, like if you think about going to the gym, you'll have a training plan typically that you go through the process. And this is very similar to that because at the gym, you're training your muscles. And with this, you're just training your brain. And so it's non invasive. There's nothing being done, there's nothing being administered to you, there's no shocking involved. I used to go out and do presentations before COVID, and people would say, "Are you going to shock us?" I said, "No, we're not going to shock you, but your results might be shocking because you might be able to actually do things that you have had some difficulty with in the past. So maybe we can help you strengthen some of this."
It's interesting that you mentioned like a chemo brain and that things because a lot of the autoimmune conditions, the medications you take are either related to or very similar to chemo. And
Mhm.
oftentimes the response can be similar where you can get brain fog. It's also known as if you have fibromyalgia, it's called
Yeah.
fibrofog.
Mhm.
It's interesting. To me, it all relates down to brain inflammation.
Yes, there's a big piece of that's happening with people. Absolutely.
What are some symptoms that we would find if ourselves like, let's go up to the adult level for a minute. You
Mhm.
mentioned
Sure.
the guy who came in, the 50-something guy who came in.
Mhm.
What are some things that might lead me to believe that maybe it is ADHD? If I'm an adult, I know you said it's very varied, but what are some of the things that I might go, I better check that out?
I think it's a good starting point because people certainly I think people have this notion of maybe they can't remember where they put things. And so I'm just inattentive. And that could be true. Absolutely. We all have our moments with that. For adults, I like to break it the same way I do with kiddos, which is let's look at what auditory symptomatology can look like or behaviors. Let's look at what visual can look like. And so I think with auditory, we can resonate maybe a little bit better with that because it's the thing. I've told you that 100 times. We had this conversation last week that we were going to go do something this weekend. The wife says to her husband, or the husband says to the wife, and yet it doesn't resonate. It's you didn't tell me that. And so here ensues this argument about did this conversation take place? One person has the recall of it, the other person doesn't. So the person who doesn't have the recall of it does not recall it. So there ensues the challenge that they have is, am I losing my mind? I don't recall this conversation. So now comes the self doubt, the self questioning. And the spouse thinks they're just being inattentive. You're just not paying attention to me. So then they start personalizing that situation, and now you have conflict building. And so you can have people who you're talking with them and you just notice they drift off. They're not there with you. They can have a drift process going on. They may not be able to focus. They'll say, I can't listen to you when the TV is on. And they'll say something like that, or the radio's too loud. I can't hear what you're saying and I can't concentrate with that. Those are some day to day symptoms that can happen with auditory processing: confusion about what's being said, recall of what's been said. We can have difficulty. Maybe you're trying to ask for directions going somewhere and you can't remember the third step that someone just told you. Go to the corner, turn left, go 2 blocks, turn right, and go down to the green road. That kind of thing. I think I was supposed to turn left and right. What was that? Kind of thing. So you'll think your memory's bad. That could actually be a symptom of auditory processing problems. Now, with visual, I think it's a little more difficult for us to naturally wrap our head around what a visual processing problem is. But this is someone who just constantly loses things, so they don't know where they set their keys. Now, I've had that happen. Tore the house apart, literally, never did find those keys. So I don't know where they went. So there can be a little bit of something going on. But if it's a consistent thing, that's what to look for. So if you're always losing your keys or can't find your shoes or where did I put my purse or left my jacket behind again or forgot to do this or forgot to put the gas cap back on the car, pulled away with that. And I've seen all of these kinds of things happening. I also have a theory about car accidents because I'm
Oh,
having a theory that we could be having some visual perception challenges out there in the world. And so I wonder what that might be. Again, maybe someone bumps into things or trips over things a lot and they just think they're clumsy. So maybe people have labeled themselves being clumsy. Maybe this is actually a visual processing problem that if we could figure this out, we might be able to strengthen that part of the brain processing. So maybe that person can live differently.
oh, this is fascinating and confusing, I have to admit. Because I'm thinking to myself, some of the things that you're commenting on, either myself or other people in my world, I'm like, oh, that sounds like sounds are often chalked up to old age, or I've always been that way. I've always
It's-
been forgetful. I sometimes chalk up not being able to remember birthdays and things like that because I had a family member for a large portion of my life that had an eidetic memory and I never had to remember it.
Mhm,
They would always tell me.
mhm.
They
Yeah.
would remember that minutia. And
Mhm,
so I
mhm,
can see, though, if this sounds very non-invasive and
mhm.
probably a good place to at least start and either have it ruled in or ruled out before we
Yeah,
go into more evasive things. If we're like, oh, Sharon, my
right.
mind's run away with me and I'm really worried I'm getting some very scary label.
Precisely, because those scary labels, I like to put them at the end of the road, not at the beginning of the road.
And
It's
how
like,
many people
let's
jump to the beginning of the road? When I was just diagnosed, this was about 8 weeks into my diagnosis, I was on a heavy medication and I noticed my short-term memory was disappearing. I'd hang up the phone, I'd say yes, and I hang up my phone, who was I talking to? And the scary part, I went back to the rheumatologist and they said, "Oh, you're getting Alzheimer's. Let's send you over to the clinic." And okay, it seemed out of the ballpark to me. I aced the test. And funny thing, I go back and I said, "No, it's got to be the medication."
and so therein lies, I think, a lot of what people encounter if they don't know to investigate. And I figured this out about 30 years ago when I was in my dog program because I was going to be working in a hospital and they wanted me to take a certain series of vaccinations. And so I had the first one and I had the most severe case of vertigo. I couldn't even get out of bed for a day. And when I could finally get out of bed and get back over to the hospital, I met with the nurse. This was a nurse. And I explained what happened to me. So she gets out the side effect list and she's reading through it. And at the very end, I'll never forget this. She said, oh, it says 1 to 2% of people can have severe vertigo. So clearly, this isn't the case for you.
Why couldn't you be that 1 to 2%? How frustrating.
And so I looked at her and I said, clearly, I am in the 1 to 2%, and I'm not taking any more of this because obviously I've got a problem with this. My body is not managing this well, and I'm allergic to it. So I'm not doing this. But never in all of her training was there the allowance for the fact that someone could be falling in the 1 to 2% category of that type of a side effect. And I remembered that. And I also was when I was a rehabilitation counselor. That was my first career really, and did that for 7 years, which was really working with people with all types of diagnosed conditions. And I really worked on the psychiatric side of it a lot. And with that, people would come in with a long list of medications. And back in that day, I actually had a pharmacist I could call up, and I would call them up and I would say, okay, here's the list. I said, is there anything contraindicated in this listing? And he would say, oh my gosh, they're on this one and this one. And yes. And I said, these are some of their symptoms. He said, because those two are in conflict with each other and they shouldn't be taking those two. So I learned a lot in that process to read the labels.
And ask questions because I
Yes.
too found that out when I was having, as I said, the memory loss, but then it also turned into hearing loss and my hair loss. I went to a second opinion and I value those. I went to a second opinion and they said, you shouldn't be on those two drugs at the same time. You'd either
Mhm.
be on one or the other.
Yeah,
And I was like, no wonder my body's overreacting.
that's right. That's right. So, second opinions, I think for your listeners, and this is something that I really talk to parents about for the children that we work with, but I talk to adults too and have for years. It's like you really need to pay attention to what you're being prescribed, and you need to figure out if that really is in your best interest because you are the person who knows your body the best. No one else is going to know your body the way you do, and you could have the 1% reaction that no 99 other percent of the people in the world never have it, but you had it and it's real. And so trust your body when it's having that reaction, that there's something you need to check out. We know our world is very heavily geared toward writing prescriptions, and there's nothing wrong with that until there is something wrong with it.
Exactly. One thing, and maybe this is part of ADHD, I don't know. But one thing I learned early on was I took lots of notes. It's a journaling. I thought I would remember, but I've had the diagnosis for 10 years. And I go back and I review it. I remember the highlights.
Mhm.
And I'm sure it's in there in the memory system somewhere, but I found that just, well, okay, what did I take 10 years ago? What medications and what were the dosages and things like that?
Right.
It's really helpful instead of having to rely on a doctor who you
Mhm.
may or may not be in contact anymore. And goodness sakes, through the pandemic, so many doctors retired, etc.
Oh, they do. They
Having
did.
your own list is really important.
It really is. And believing that the body can heal itself. And I think that's where I like to come in because as we started in the beginning with this journey today, so many people have this notion that ADHD, once you have it forever, and that's a myth. That is just absolutely a myth. It is not necessarily the truth for everyone. And I'll just put it that way. Obviously, I've not worked with everyone on the planet who's struggling. People I have worked are the ones who've worked with are the ones who have come into my clinics. And for them, they've either been down the pathway of having tried a lot of different kinds of medications, and either the side effects were a problem, or it didn't work, or it worked for a while and it stopped working, or they're on the other side where they don't want to do those medications. And so we are a nice alternative that really is considered non invasive. We're not adding anything into the body at all. It's just a process of really learning how to manage your brain a little bit better. And we can help people do that.
Wow. I I'm just shocked and relief that it's not a lifelong thing. I thought it was one of those things you got the label. It's, oh, sorry, your brain's label.
Mhm. That's what's been held for 50 years, probably, is that there's nothing you can do about this. And I'm sitting here today, 15 years in of this, and I see once we kind of change how we're looking at this and we delve into it from a different angle, we're quite capable of finding pathways for people. And once you figure out, because with the auditory and the visual, most people have a combination of areas that are strong on auditory, areas that are strong on visual, and then areas that are weak on both. And it's understanding that play between almost a hopscotch pattern on the sidewalk. Their child's game of hopscotch is okay, this works, this doesn't. This one works, this doesn't. And understanding how to work within that framework. And in the book, I really have two chapters, one on auditory, one on visual, that has a checklist at the end of that. And then I had the chapter where children have both and have none of the processing on either side. And so most people do have that combination. And if we can figure out what that combination is, you're better able to play to your strengths. And then when you know where those areas are that you need support, you can say, I really do need to have this written down. It's very difficult for me to hang on to a lot of details with this. But because I'm a visual person, you hear people talk about, I'm a visual learner, or someone say, well, I'm an auditory learner. That's what they've learned to do is play to their strengths. But those who don't know about that and don't know what their strengths are, then they end up struggling more.
Wow. Okay. One of the questions I have, though, as I'm coming through my mind is like, can this be done online or do I need to come to your clinic or how does this work? Because it sounds like an amazing place to start to at
Mhm.
least get this understood about yourself. So, can it be done online or do we need to come?
Yes. Telehealth is available with the understanding that I do not diagnose. So I don't diagnose because I don't need to. What we do is just look at those, we run that assessment, and I can do that wherever someone's setting. We schedule that up, we do it through Zoom. We're able to identify the same as if you're sitting in my clinic, we can get the data. And then I can do a consult with a person. It's okay, these are your strengths and these are the areas that need to be strengthened. And then the EEG biofeedback, I've got people up and down California who are doing that. And it just depends on other places. We've had some success in helping others because, again, this isn't about diagnosis. It isn't about treating someone. It's about really helping them train their brain. Their brain is learning how to do this. So with the EEG biofeedback, we're still there guiding and helping and consulting with people as they go through their sessions, regardless of where you're setting. Yet the brain of that person is figuring out how to strengthen itself because we've identified those areas of weakness. We're setting up those training plans. And then by using a repeated process 2 or 3 times a week, we can do that. So usually within about 10 hours of that, we come back and we reassess and see where the person has improved on those areas that were targeted to strengthen them. And so we've had good success.
Wow, Dr. Connie, this has just been amazing so far. I'm mesmerized, and I'm so mesmerized that I skipped right past the commercial break. So, everyone, we'll be right back after this quick commercial break.
The Autoimmune Hour will return after these messages from our sponsors. It's great sponsors like these that keep this show coming to you every week. Be sure and stop by understandingautoimmune.com to learn more.
Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back, everyone, from that quick commercial break. As I mentioned before, I've been mesmerized this whole idea of that you're not stuck with the brain that you've got. Or if it's brain fog, maybe this can help, all those sorts of things. So let's jump back in with Dr. Connie McReynolds. She's been sharing with us all about ADHD and how neuroplasticity and our brain can work. As you've gone through the process for a number of years with people, are you finding that does it stay or do they have to continually retrain their brain? I don't know if that's the way to ask the question.
So, what I will preface this with is there are different systems out there. The system that I was so fortunate because I was tied in with the university when I learned of this and set up my first clinic in a university setting. I was a professor for 25 years and retired a year or two ago. But in that process, I had access to professionals, other professors who were using this system, this particular system. And they were using it in another county, helping children learn to read who were struggling to learn how to read. When you read the book, you'll see there's a strong tie in my world to that, back to my mother who taught second grade. And with this, when the brain learns, it tends to hold on to the pattern. So, with this particular system, there's a caveat about our system. Without getting too technical and having people zone out on us here, there's a thing called zeroing out facial artifact, and a lot of the systems on the market do not do this. And so, part of what happens with other EEG systems is that any kind of facial movement, eye blinking, even swallowing, on some systems will be registered as EEG brain signals when it's really EMG signals. And so it gets convoluted, the data get convoluted. And so with this system, it zeroes out all of that, so that what we know we're measuring are pure brain waves in there. So we are able to clear that out using the system. It's some automatic settings in there that we're able to use that clean that out. And then I think our success is tied to the fact that we are using that type of a system. And then through the repetition, we are systematic about what we do. So people have to do 30-minute sessions 2 or 3 times a week. They do 20 of those. And the consistency is everything about this consistency, participation on that. And then after the 10 hours of those 20 sessions, those are 30-minute sessions, we come back and we reassess. So we're evidence based. And a lot of places don't have the evidence based assessment so that people can actually see. Because part of what happens with brain training is it's subtle. So it's a lot like a dimmer switch in a room. And so you walk in, it isn't like flipping on a switch, like you go one time, you're going to flip your brain on. It doesn't work that way. You're training your brain. And so going to the gym, you have to keep going while you're building those muscles. The good news with the brain versus your body is that your brain tends to hold on to those patterns. So they get what we call wired in. So they get wired in. And when it's wired in, it tends, you can think of a kind of a rut in a road. And that's why bad habits are hard to change because you've got a rut built there for that bad habit. But with the good habit, you want to build the rut too, and you want that to be the go-to for your brain. And that's what the brain naturally will do. So the brain really is taking over and doing this. You cannot think your way through this in these sessions. You have to allow your brain to take over and do the process. And with that, it tends to hold. So I've had people who had very severe psychiatric challenges at the front end who have called me 5 and 6 years later after they finished. And they just say, I just want you to know it just keeps getting better and better. And I had one woman tell me that she used to work at the JPL lab here in Southern California when she was very young. And she told me recently that she feels like her brain is back to how it was when she first was hired to work with them. And she had lost so much functioning due to trauma, severe trauma, and just depression and anxiety, PTSD. And she was able to just relax, learn how to relax her brain again and be able to get her old self back.
That's amazing. Now, I want to go tangential a little bit here. If you've got or been diagnosed with a brain fog, we'll just use that as a generic term.
Mhm.
Does this process have to work in tandem with something else to, I don't know what it would be, but some sort of thing to calm the inflammation of the brain, or does the process itself calm the inflammation of the brain?
I think those are really good questions. I'm not sure science has a full answer for that particular question. What I can speak to is what I've seen in my clinics. And I do encourage people to pay attention to what they're eating, pay attention to whether or not they have food allergies that can be triggering some things. I'm not a nutritionist, but I will encourage them to do some research.
Oh,
Encourage.
absolutely. I was glutened over the weekend. I make it a verb now.
Yeah. And a lot of people are. A lot of people have dairy problems. A lot of
And
people have gluten problems.
the headache and the thought processing, the whole thing for about 48 hours.
We have to really understand our body and becoming familiar with that. And I think in today's world, we hear so much more about it. 50 years ago, people didn't know what we were saying. When it's like, what? Pay attention. Well, I've got two hands, 2 feet, whatever. But nowadays, we understand there's a lot more going on. And what we put into our body matters. What kind of water are we drinking? What kind of fluids are we putting in? All of that. And so I work with people from that angle because I'll ask them some of those questions. I ask them how they're sleeping. I ask them what their electronic use is on their cell phones and late at night on the computers and the TV and the blue light and all that we know about that as well. And I'm looking at what are they experiencing. So if they had an onset of the brain fog, there are some really good books out there about the pain brain. Norman Doidge wrote some really good books on the pain brain, chronic pain, and how that takes over what he calls real estate in the brain, and how chronic pain can actually give a person the feeling that they're losing their mind, that they're not as sharp as they used to be. And there's some reality to that from the standpoint that chronic pain takes over the brain. So it takes over more real estate. And so I'm working with that. I've worked with some folks with fibromyalgia before. And so we've been able to calm down the part of the brain that gets triggered with anxiety and panic and worry and all of those things. So, brain fog is an artifact typically of something that has come along. And yes, check out inflammation. Find a health provider. And I don't know, it might not be necessarily fully Western. You may have to look beyond Western medicine sometimes to find people who can help you with that. But regardless of all of that, we have been able to help people reduce or sharpen up their mental faculties because you're just training the brain. So you're just doing an exercise program for your brain. And if we can help strengthen some of those pathways that may have gotten fogged over, then people are reporting that they're experiencing some improvements with that.
Wow. So often I feel like the medical advice I've been given over the years is pretty much, I hate this term, women your age.
To me, that's be careful how I word this.
I know we don't have to go down that road. I just think the phrase women your age, people your age, men your age, whatever.
Let's just drop all that language because there's nothing true to that. And this is where myths have taken over. And instead of investigating and looking for the alternative process, when we hit a road in Western medicine, we tend to blame the person. And so you've got a problem here. You're just not responding to this medication, or people your age have this. It's to me, that doesn't really get us down the road. Is that moving us forward? Is my question. Does that move us forward in helping this person improve their quality of life? And if the answer is yes, then great. Then let's continue pursuing. If it feels like we just hit a dead end, then we probably need to turn around and go back up the road and find another branch to go down because clearly that branch didn't take us to farther down the road to health and recovery and to wellness and to living a better quality of life. And that's what I think people are truly after. It's like, can we help people live a better quality of life? And that's what my mission is, regardless of age.
I like that regardless of age. I just want to go back. We've talked a lot about adults. I know your book is also about children, and I want to make sure that we can cover that as well. And as a parent, and I want to go through some ideas of helping our children, because
Mhm.
my concern is happening that when they get labeled early on, not only they begin to believe that about themselves, oh, that's just the way I am. And I can't
Mhm.
imagine how many adults are walking around, oh, that's just the way I am. And I know
Mhm.
we covered that a little bit, but let's talk more in depth about if I'm a parent, how can I help my child find this out and help them navigate through their early years?
Oh boy, it's where my heart lies. My mom taught second grade for 32 years in the same classroom. And so I really watched a lot of what went on as I grew up in that process and children who could learn and those who struggled, what she did to try and be innovative and to help. And I think that just came naturally to me when I moved into rehabilitation counseling. And then as I built this clinic starting about 15 years ago, we started working with children. And what I learned early on in that process is that these traditional approaches For the children who were showing up in my clinic, it wasn't working. So the traditional assessments at school weren't getting to the root cause. The medications weren't solving the problem, according to parent report. Some children felt like zombies. They felt zoned out. The parents were really worried. And there's a lot of research, and I have some of it in my book about some of the side effects. Now, not everyone has side effects. I'm quick to say that.
Yep,
But for
remember
those,
the 1 to 2% for you?
yeah, it's true. And so we have to really look at these things, and these behavioral interventions weren't working. So parents would say, we go to behavioral interventions, but they don't remember it. So we run these assessments. So here's what I started learning is these children had auditory processing problems. And it didn't matter how many times someone told them to do something. If they couldn't remember how to do it, guess what? It doesn't matter how many times you're told. It doesn't matter how loudly you're spoken to. It doesn't matter what kind of punishment is offered up, what kind of rewards and positive reinforcement happen. It still isn't making a difference. And there's your first big clue. If everything you're doing isn't landing you in a different place and improving the quality of life on a consistent manner, something's off. Something isn't working, something's being missed. And so up on my website, you can take a brief free assessment there. You can also sign up for my newsletter, and I'll send you the first 3 chapters of my book for free to get you started on figuring out what this might be. Because once you understand what your child is dealing with, you can advocate better for your child at school. Teachers, I've been a teacher for 25 years. My mother was for 32 years. My aunt was the dean of a college of education. My uncle was a professor. I had other aunts who were teachers. So I come from a long line of being on that side of the fence. And what I can say is that we need to do a better job of teaching teachers what this looks like in the classroom, because some teachers get it and others don't, and they blame the child. And if the parents are blaming the child, the teacher's blaming the child, and the child's blaming the child, this is a no-win situation. What we want to do is turn this all around, and I can do it in about 30 minutes, because with this assessment, we can figure out what's really going on. And from that, we can build advocacy plans for IEPs, the individual education plan, or 504, which is accommodations in the classroom for children, so that teachers can understand what's really going on. And this assessment, I'll send it off, I'll give it to parents and say, take this in. I highlight those areas. And at times, depending on where we are, I can write some, parents will hire me to write a recommendation letter, depending on what's needed there. I can point some things out as well. You just have to understand what's happening. Because if we can understand where this child is struggling, then we can employ the appropriate interventions. I've had said for so long, you have to put the interventions in the right order. If this child can't remember what you're saying, then putting this child in talk therapy probably isn't going to do a whole lot. In the classroom, the teacher repeating the information, if you can't hang on to it, isn't going to do a whole lot. The alternative to that is put it in writing. Back to the visual. If this child responds better with visual cueing, and I'll tell parents that they can't remember how to do the chores or what to do, let's try doing a list. Put a whiteboard up somewhere, and then point the child to the whiteboard and say, okay, let's check this off. If that's working, then that could be a clue. Okay, this child's more visually oriented. When we go this direction, things work a little bit better than if I'm just saying, do this, and it goes in one ear and out the other.
I have to put my hand up. I'm a gold star girl. I like,
Mhm.
I mean, what I mean by that is I like lists and gold stars.
And so really it's understanding, what does this child's behavior tell us? And what we're so focused on typically in this world is getting rid of the behavior. So that's where the prescriptions come in. That's where the behavioral interventions come in. And I think sometimes we're too quick into that pool before we figure out, well, what is this information telling us? So let's decode these behaviors. Let's figure out what it's telling us. And then with this assessment, we can dive into it. So we can get into 37 areas of how the brain's working. And this is where it's working. This is why it isn't. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in the room with the parents where the clinicians had the child doing the assessment. Clinician brings the report back in, and I'm reading through the report, and it's the exact language that a parent has just used to describe their child. Their mouth drops because they know I've been in the room, so I had no influence. And they're going, this is the first time all of this has ever made sense to me.
And what a relief for the child and actually for the adult, calming
Everyone wins.
years of possible trauma
That's right.
and getting rid of labels that no longer serve us. I just can't
They,
imagine that.
they
That's a
don't typically serve us very well, for children in particular.
Well, yeah, especially if they carry them on. Too often they take ownership of that label instead of, okay, that's something I need to eradicate, work on, solve, whatever it is. As a child, and I think even as an adult, I see people with autoimmune take on that label of whatever their autoimmune condition is. Their I have diagnosis becomes an I am. And that's absolutely one of the hardest things to heal from is an I am.
Exactly, because that's a very powerful statement. We take ownership of whatever follows after I am, and we don't want to say that. And I had a friend one time who had been diagnosed. She had cancer come back, and we were at lunch, and she said they found a few cancer cells in my body. She didn't say I have cancer.
I love that. I love that. I always tell this story and I tell it often on the show about this idea of labels. And the idea is when someone comes to me, I think of it as an exterminator. The exterminator can come and say, "You have cockroaches." Okay, yeah, I don't want those. What are we going to do to get rid of those?
Mhm.
But I am not the cockroach.
Exactly. That's right. We are not these conditions. These are opportunities for us to figure out what's the next step in our life and our journey. And if parents and teachers can really figure that out, that this isn't a child who's trying to make your life miserable. We have that happen enough. That's why I say that. A lot of parents don't take that position. They're taking the position of what can I do to really support my child and how can we work through this? But people are on both sides of the camps and teachers are on both sides of the camp. When I ran the pilot project in elementary school, I actually had a teacher set in on when I went over the assessment results with the parent, and I had an eye to that teacher. It was a male teacher in elementary school, and this little boy was struggling horribly in the classroom. And as I went through all this data and showed the parent, and then the teacher was sitting there, I watched his face completely shift
Mm.
because suddenly this wasn't a child that was just trying to make his day hard in the classroom. This little boy couldn't remember what was being told to him. And he was acting out because he was frustrated, he was worried, he was scared, he was in trouble all the time. And he didn't know what to do to get himself out of it because he couldn't say, Mr. So and so, my auditory vigilance is off today. I'm not tracking well with you. Could you please repeat?
Wow. What a strong statement to be able to say as a young person, how that being able to set the boundaries and the guidelines for what works. What an amazing way to be able to get
Mhm.
through life and not have those labels stick with you throughout your whole life. Because I know a
Yeah.
lot of adults that say to me, and a lot of people will look at them, that's just an excuse. I have ADHD, and they'll use it. The boss will go, that's just an excuse.
Yeah, it's a reality for an awful lot of people with millions and millions of people who struggle with this. And if we can get rid of the struggle in some small segment of the world, let's do it. Because it doesn't hurt, doesn't invade your body in any way. It just helps you strengthen your brain and then it hangs on to that. And then you go on. And we love our clients, but we want you to come in and want you to get out because I want you to go live your life.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So we're just down to the last couple minutes. Any final thoughts? And then also please share with us the website and more about how we can get the book Solving the ADHD Riddle.
I think for me, it's really about changing the narrative around ADHD and a lot of other conditions because I treat trauma. We tackle a lot of that. These are brain conditions, and you can retrain your brain. You literally can retrain your brain. It's called neuroplasticity, and we've known about it for nearly 100 years. And this just helps you employ that more effectively. And the good news is, when you train your brain, it tends to hold on to it. You go on and live your life. There's a lot of information up on my website, which is www. Connie McReynolds, which is ConnieMcReynolds.com. There's a contact form. There's the free brief assessment. There's the newsletter. They'll get the first 3 chapters of my book for free. There's a link to Amazon to be able to purchase the book there. I think it's also out on Barnes and Noble and other online booksellers as well. There's testimonials. I have a number of podcasts up there I've done. I actually used to do one of my own called Roadmap for the Brain. And I've been pivoting and doing some other things now. And the newsletter, you sign up for that, and you get a welcome newsletter. And then I send those out not very often, once or twice a month, just as tips and such for parents and adults. So there's a lot of information up there that you can spend your time going through. There's some short video clips that might be interesting as well.
Fantastic. Now, just one quick question about neuroplasticity. For the longest time, they thought that it got less and less as you age.
Hmm.
But it sounds like maybe not
It's
true.
another myth that I just want to bust. It just isn't true. It just isn't true. It doesn't have to be that way. So we've helped people in their 70s and 80s who just want to sharpen their game. And I've worked with athletes as well. So you can be on the other side of things. So I worked with a major league ball player. I worked with a gymnast who wanted to just sharpen her attention and focus. And she came back with 5 medals, so she's probably heavier than what she weighed when she walked back into the clinic. So there's a lot of ways that this is used. A lot of sports teams actually use neurofeedback themselves and have improved their sports outcomes. There's a lot of ways to do it. People love it. The military uses this in California. I have a contract with the VA, so people who are on Tri-West, we can work with veterans and help them with this as well.
Fantastic. That's amazing. I'm just loving all the ways that people are beginning to realize that the brain and the mind are not separate from the body.
That's exactly right. And we are learning so much. Every year we learn more and more about this. And I think we're just at the cusp. I always feel like January when I'm just getting started. It's okay. Where are we going this year? Because it always feels like there's so much more that we're going to learn and uncover and be able to develop and create. And I just think it's a very exciting time to be here and to be doing this work. And I thank you so much for having me on today.
So, everyone, that's Dr. Connie McReynolds, and she is the author of the book called Solving the ADHD Riddle, The Real Causes and Lasting Solutions to Your Child's Struggle to Learn. And I think you heard today that it's not just about child, that we can learn a lot and heal our brain a lot, even as an adult. And as she mentioned, the neuroplasticity goes on for the rest of our whole life. So amazing. And everyone, have a great week, whatever your adventures, and join me next week for another brand new episode. Enjoy.
The information provided on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, including the websites understandingautoimmune.com and lifeinterruptedradio.com, plus social media, is for educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, and its websites, and other media outlets is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes.